you know, there is just as much as there's a decision to run for office, there's a process where you win,
Yeah.
and then you have to actually do the work. You know, what have you learned in the last year?
I think in the public realm, the first year for me has been sitting back, just observing and learning how it works. And a lot of what you find is, you know, by design, everything doesn't happen as fast in government at all levels. It's very risk averse. It's very, this is the way we've always done it, which is okay. That's a good thing. Yeah, what I've learned is just to sort of sit back and sort of try to figure out how to be effective in this position. There's so many people that come in, and we did the same thing. We promised, I mean, I have a platform that's a mile long of all the things I was going to do, and honestly, you know, now I'm down to like, all right, let's just try to get one or two things accomplished, and in the near term, and then maybe accelerate and do that later. But you have to find a lot of compromises, despite the fact that Cambridge is a fairly high tax area, which is something that I spoke out against a long time ago. I'm a firm believer in attracting money in as opposed to trying to take it from who's already here. And that means investment. That doesn't mean constantly just going to the state or the feds for like, give us money, which we're grateful for. We are eternally grateful for that, and we get a lot of that. But ultimately, a community will sustain itself when it figures out how to survive financially on its own. And that doesn't mean going out wishing for that big development. That doesn't mean going out hoping that this new industry comes in right and saves everyone. There's a good book called the Journal of the Four Horsemen, and that's what they did, you know, and they had some successes, but they didn't really, it didn't change the underlying problem that was happening in the city of Cambridge, which was the economy was changing around it. There was a lot of disinvestment. People were still, the tax base was still sort of eroding, particularly in the center. Our Main Street was dying. You know, they attacked what they needed to at the time.
What are the ones at the top there that you hope to see happen, and but maybe even more importantly, the ones that you're most excited about? This is what we'll push on next.
Absent of all other outside investment in a community the way they exist is through quality housing and a tax base. Traditionally, if you look at the way a city survives, it's by taxing property, and that's a fact. And so a lot of us we all ran on the platform after reading the 1969 housing report, and we looked at housing conditions then and housing conditions now, and we said, it really hasn't changed. The same complaints are coming constantly, and there's been some attempts, but my background being in technology, my education is environment and biology, but it's a sciencey type mind. I'm like, we really need to have data to understand where we are. Peter Drucker had who was the management guru, says if it can be measured, it can be improved. So to answer your question, I think a lot of things flow through if we can actually move the ball forward just a little, to have some measured success in our housing stock and actually starting to bring better housing. And that does not mean, let me be very clear, bringing in some affordable housing developer with a 40-year Sweden deal from the state to walk away and be an absentee landlord. This means people investing in their homes, staying in their homes, bringing up their neighborhoods one little piece at a time. So I'm a huge advocate of the neighborhood revitalization report that was created and largely was the result of our housing coordinator, Yvette Robinson, who's part-time here from the Detroit area. If anywhere, if you can fix Detroit, you can fix Cambridge. So the lessons learned there, I think we're applying a lot of them here. So my intention is to get some data around what we need to be able to measure our success with housing, and that's through my work with the Technology Committee, and then also support as much as I can legislatively and process-wise the neighborhood revitalization plan, which is a series of steps to help us sort of move our housing stock forward. And again, that's houses that are being neglected and have been neglected, and bringing them back to and actually making it better. And that dovetails to my absolute passion for the rails to trails, building a safe street and pedestrian network, planting lots of street trees if we can. There's an ordinance that I've introduced that is one of the, if you want to fix your city, one of the things you do is you get rid of massive parking lots that are completely underutilized. There's practically zero tax revenue that comes in from them. They prevent the built environment from happening. We're not the first to do this. We're actually kind of late to the game for the progressive cities. That's something that's going to be coming up. It doesn't take parking away. That's one thing that people, if you've ever lived in Philadelphia in a snowstorm and you take some, and they shovel out their spot and you take it, you learn how much people value parking. It's a good way to get yourself injured if you take somebody's parking space. So I understand the value of that, but what this does is it actually says, all right, we're going to convert the word minimum to maximum. So let's just say in a new development, you're supposed to have 1.5 spaces per dwelling unit. Okay, and it's pretty standard with the zoning the way it was historically, which a lot of it has to be undone. It's bad. But it turns that and says minimum to maximum, so it gives the person a choice. And then the other thing it does is it says, okay, if you go over this maximum, here's what you're going to need if you want to follow good advice from the zoning commission. But if you need more, you've got to prove to us that you need it, and you also have to lightly. It's not a burden to development, but what you would have to do is make it green. So it's got to be pervious surface, it's got to have trees, because the last thing we want is just more blacktop, which is as evidenced by what we're seeing today in our neighborhood, which is a lot of water making its way too quickly into the river, flooding, and issues, related to that.
And I can't imagine a more remarkable opportunity for a town like Cambridge than almost 30 or 40 acres of waterfront property that will now, as of yesterday, the hospital moving is now really ready to go.
Yeah.
Are you happy where we are with that?
Full disclosure, I was the part-time events coordinator at Salewinds Governor's Hall before I went to graduate school. I moved back for a brief period, so I stood at that site many times looking at this wonderful vision of the site that they had created back in, when would that have been, I'm aging myself, 97 or something. Frank Nahr was still, he was the executive director of Salewinds Park at the time. So to answer your question, and I said I was involved in a lot of things. I was involved in the Waterfront implementation plan, the Waterfront 2020, the RUDAT, which was a wonderful report that we've just sat on the shelf, but however, it actually turned into our comprehensive plan. So we have had a ton of input. We've got tons of plans that honestly, that we've articulated over and over again the same thing. When it came time to actually move this forward, the one thing that I felt was super important and pushed for was that we don't want to tell a master developer exactly what to do, but we really need to hold them to the framework and the guidebook that the community has provided. And that was, I think, the most important thing, and the thing that I got most excited about was to say, guess what? This is another urbanist quote. I was actually traveling one time and I was on a tour, and the woman that was the tour guide says, yeah, they wanted to put it's this quaint little vineyard area. She's like, yeah, they wanted to put an 8-story hotel there. And you know what we told them? You can build an 8-story hotel wherever you want, just not there. So, and it would have destroyed the town. And we've destroyed the fabric of this city in many ways by not paying attention to that. So this framework that the community laid out says, look, what we care most about on Salewinds is green space all along the waterfront. And look at Long Wharf, look at Great Marsh, look at the very treasured waterfront assets we have in this city, and that's the collective intelligence of the community saying, wow, you have a really nice park along the water, you uplift neighborhoods way back. You wall off the water with condos, and you're walling it off, and the neighborhoods behind it, we've got one right behind the creek area, that nothing happened when that whole creek area developed, because if we had set that back and done townhomes and public access to the water, we probably would have helped the neighborhoods 3 or 4 blocks in. And these aren't my words, this is actually Ed McMahon, who's actually been at WHCP radio a few times. He actually says it more clearly than everyone, but he's like, you know, a lot of times communities destroy the very reason that people come there and want to live there. You know, he said one of the things they found out about golf courses, which my very good friend, or one of my best friends is the director of golf at the Hyatt, and they're running into this scenario where they're looking to develop that. And one of Ed McMahon's quotes is, he said, you know, they did this research to find out who lived on golf courses and why, and the vast majority of people that live on golf courses don't golf. The reason they're there is because they like that green space that they can look out on and unfortunately risk their life letting their dog out or their kids playing in their backyard if those golfers are anything like I am. But it's just those kind of lessons and things that, you know, aren't always intuitive, but are so true when you really think about it. So to answer your question about Salewinds, we have a wonderful framework. It is in the transfer agreement, which means here's the guidebook, and you can do anything you want as long as you do this. So the other thing that I think was a component of that was incremental development. One of the things that I've been reading about is we always look for master developers, and that's okay, but master developers need massive financing. They look at the project in one big scope, which is okay. However, if they make a mistake, they make a big mistake. As opposed if you do incremental development, which our framework allows for, and small-scale development at one at a time, it allows you to make mistakes without destroying the whole thing. You can actually say, well, that didn't work. And that's the way cities developed historically. Requires less big bank financing, it requires less commitments on behalf of, you can use some local financing, you can use smaller scale developers, you can have different people with different ideas, again, fit into what the community wants. Try that out and see if it works. So I'm excited that we may have that opportunity, which is a very progressive model to look at things, because we're not the Inner Harbor. We're not Park Place or whatever it was in Annapolis that one of the developers proposed. You know, we're not actually the Naval Yard or whatever, or in Washington, D.C. We're a much smaller community, and we have to respect, as what the comprehensive plan said, you know, our strategic advantages, things that you can do here that you can't do anywhere else. Embrace oysters, embrace the working waterfront, embrace whatever form that is now. We're not going back to big industry. We're not going back to the ice houses filling up with tuna. I mean, but we do have a lot of strengths, comparative advantages that we can cultivate, and I think we are with our plan.
One of the potentially exciting things has just been announced by the governor, that Pine Street is one of only 2 places in the state that they're targeting for this initiative to bring back a community. It looks like it's multi-layered. Tell us about it and what you like about it. How much do you know? Were you involved in that?
Yep. Honestly, other than studying the neighborhood revitalization plan and knowing that it fits in with that, which is what I was thankful for, this is a surprise to me. honestly, that it was announced. However, it's not surprising that it worked, because the Department of Housing and Community Development has been a huge funder of what we've been seeing there. So affirming the investment and actually going the next step with what they've already been doing. And it's when the governor announces it, it's news. But it sounds to me like it'll still be incremental development. It'll be using nonprofit partners that have very good success in that area. I mean, Habitat doesn't just assume that if I build a house, somebody's going to live it and take care of it. They actually work with people that may have never had a home in their life. Home ownership may not be in their family ever. So they require input, and assistance. They use a lot of volunteer labor to help, which gets the community involved, invested in the project. They do the financing, and they ensure that we're actually transforming a block and a house one at a time. And that kind of success you can't get by just throwing money at a problem. So to me, what's most interesting about that is that it looks like, whereas in the past the state, like I said, would say, we need affordable housing. Well, what is that? Is that just building like a housing project, which most cities have knocked theirs down because they were colossal failures? That's not what you needed. You needed to actually educate, assist, and sort of make the community sustainable before you went and just from afar decided to just build something and hope that it was going to work. So the approach this time, I'm super excited about, because I think it's going to actually take and bring that neighborhood back the same way that it was built initially, which is through people investing and having a stake in each property that was built and redeveloped. And we cannot ignore that other components of that neighborhood revitalization plan are making sure that if a property goes up for sale, that it doesn't fall into the hands of someone that isn't looking to improve it. And that also means us looking at, why weren't properties being invested in certain areas of our community? Why not? Why did we have that lack of investment? It could be that you can't build legally what used to be there with setbacks and things like that. And we have a very progressive code, so I don't want to imply that we don't. We have the UDC is what it's called. I think it stands for Uniform Design Code, and it's form-based zoning. So it's like really looks less at use and more at form, so that it fits into the fabric of the neighborhood than sort of saying you must be X amount away from the street and you must have this many parking places and whatever, because what you'd end up doing is trying to build something that wasn't there historically. So I'm excited about it, and I'm going to advocate that it happen in the way they say they are, because I think we need it to be sustainable.
There is a perception, whether it's correct or not, that crime remains a major problem, not only in terms of quality of life, but economic development, and I think there's a lot of interest in seeing what government can do, and we're just asking each of you to kind of assess how challenging this situation is.
Well, full disclosure, my father was a crime scene investigator with the state police for 25 years. He was with the sheriff's department for another 15 years. My uncle was a captain in the Easton Police Department, the chief of police at St. Michael's for 8 years, and he actually didn't retire. He was an officer until he passed. So I have a long line of involvement in law enforcement. That also meant that Christmas parties were at firehouses where the police and the fire companies were. Linkwood, Salem Firehouse. I remember looking for Santa Claus out that window. So the Sunday dinner table at my grandmother's was mostly my grandmother, who worked for a judge, my father and uncle, brothers, recounting stories and telling me how things really were and how it actually worked. So for good or for bad, I have a massive template of being involved in the law enforcement community. That said, things appear to have changed, and my father and uncle told me that things were changing. Like it went from a, and this isn't anyone's fault, but went from a serve and protect to a more, I guess, not the same. Like it used to be that officers felt perceived as a partner in the community as opposed to the guy that just comes out and arrests me. It was more the help me change a tire. And that's actually why they say they got involved in the whole thing. And they sort of got discouraged when it looked like it was changing to more, my father once said, we were taught the only reason you would ever pull your gun is if you intend to use it. And so I think about that. It's not commentary on anything, but it's sort of like, what does that mean for where we are now? And, clearly, as much as things change, they stay the same, but maybe things are different. So for me, I'm trying to understand by listening to what the law enforcement tells us they need, which the first thing they needed for us was money. So that they could attract and recruit talent. That's what they told us. So that's what we did. So it remains to be seen if that actually gave them the jump start they needed. I'm really hopeful for that. I think it's probably a little soon to find out if that actually, if they've been able to do that. I mean, it's like anything, it's really hard to find employees in any business right now, which is a whole nother subject. So that, making sure they have the tools to succeed. It's sort of like, asking somebody to build a house and not giving them a hammer and wood. So to go back to housing, sorry. I think housing stock will go a long way improving the quality of life for our citizens. One of the things we've tossed around is if we are able to put in place what's called a tiered rental licensing. What would count against you as a landlord is, and again, there's things you have to measure and record. You can't just say, well, that's a bad house or that's a bad landlord. You can't just say that. You got to record it. So we need a way to capture it. But if there's a house that is constantly a scene of criminal activity, there's discussions that should count against you as a landlord. You're essentially not, you're harboring criminals. For lack of a better word. So that would actually hit you in your pocket because your rental license would be more than a person who, doesn't disrupt the neighborhood, doesn't have the police constantly being called on the tenants. So that's something I think that would go a long way too, and working with the police department to just take the load off of them, because if data shows us that it's the same houses, the same parts of town, the same landlords, the same tenants that are the problem, then we will know that. And then we can actually work with them and build a system in our government to attempt to correct that, which means if you're not a good landlord, we don't want you. If you can't figure out how to attract and cultivate good tenants and have good housing. And then there's also bad tenants. I mean, I'm not gonna deny that. Some people, don't take care of stuff. But so we don't want to hold a landlord accountable for a bad tenant that they didn't realize they had, So it's complicated, but unless you can actually prove it with data, record it, which means potentially working with our other members of government, like the code enforcement operations and things like that. And then even our Municipal Utilities Commission, they do the rental registrations. Code enforcement doesn't register the rental properties. But if we're asking code enforcement to tie the data that they're collecting in with a tiered licensing scheme, we've got to look at not only how that data comes together so we can look at it, but also the processes around, so we're not adding work, that we're actually saving time and effort on behalf of our employees who are already overworked. So I think that's going to go a long way towards the law enforcement if we can actually move our neighborhoods in a different direction.
It is unfortunate on a number of different levels that this new council had to deal with the fact that the mayor is under investigation.
Yeah.
And whether this proves to be a case of guilt or innocence, it does put a cloud on government, and it does put a cloud on the town. And so we're asking each of you to assess the impact of this.
I basically, the mayor said it was a private matter, and it's being handled privately, and I have no reason to believe anything else. And I don't think I am at liberty to talk about that any more than, I haven't seen any disruption to our government or what we're trying to accomplish, or our effectiveness, or in terms of operationally what we're doing. So hopefully it's something that doesn't cloud over the laundry list of good things that we're trying to do.
Well,
There is one other thing I wanted to bring up is, and I'm surprised you didn't bring it up, is the ARPA money, the rescue money.
Yeah.
That is probably, for us, our young council, and for any council, it's a historic gift of money to cities all over the United States, and it is super important that we're wise with what we do with that we do it in a way that doesn't, it isn't that we can, another thing I read about, the Bloomberg has tried to, and some different, Brookings Institution, sorry, think tank says you really need to look at things that are what they call force multipliers. So if you invest $1 with this money, it should turn into 2. And that's really hard to do. So I am super hoping that the rest of the council, we can come together and really vet how we're going to invest this money so that, whatever we put it towards isn't just a once and done. I think that would be a mistake. Like 10 million-ish. We already got the first deposit, and the one thing that we've approved so far, which is a fire truck that the fire company has needed for many, many years. But then the rest, we've asked for departmental needs within the city, things that maybe have been neglected for years and years and years that we can stop kicking the can on. And for me personally, one of the things I've learned from my constituents in Ward 1, and today is a case in point, is we got a real problem with not only the river coming up into the neighborhoods, and there's a sizable percentage of the city's tax base is along there. I mean, it doesn't make anyone any better, but I can tell you that to devalue waterfront properties in this city would be a huge, huge hit to our tax base, the money coming into the city. So we need to look hard at that. And then the other thing we have to look hard into is we have that happens to be the oldest part of the city. So the infrastructure under there is super old. And we've got some efforts looking at not only the river coming up, trying to take back what was once its, he wants it back, but also the sewer and the water flowing down towards it. And I can tell you that I live down there. I don't own where I live. I'm renting. But you smell sewer. You have things bubbling up out of the storm drains that you shouldn't. And I'm trying, my environmental side and my quality of life side says, this is a problem. It's becoming more of a problem. And my fear is that we've got water infiltrating our public systems under the ground that we can't see, and vice versa. And that also, we know it's infiltrating the river. And if you want to talk about the future of this city and this community, we have to solve both of those, because the river is why we're here. This city exists in the first place, and the city exists to make sure that the health of the river and the health of its community being properly functioning water and sewer infrastructure, and it's all tied together. This is not one ward's problem. It is all tied together. I really would hope, and my hope is that we can apply some of the rescue money to that, because I'm not so sure we otherwise can afford to fix it, which is sad.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate your service.